topic which a little different than you guys had originally requested. So the topic that I had suggested was to talk about social return on invested capital, which I think maybe might resonate with Rotarians. Rotary is a wonderful organization worldwide, and the various chapters, and especially various Indian chapters, have done really exceptional work. So I'm very happy to talk to you guys. And this notion of looking at charity and philanthropy from the lens of a capital allocator can be quite powerful. And it can have a lot of transformative impacts that ordinarily may not be possible. There were two individuals who in 2019 won the Nobel Prize for Economics, and they're married to each other. This French lady, Esther Duflo, and her Indian husband, Abhijit Banerjee. And they've written a few books on this. Like, for example, this one here is one of their more recent books. And both of them have done some really remarkable work on trying to measure social impacts. So, when we are trying to do good in the world and when we are trying to help humanity, if you will, but basically when we are trying to help humanity and improve the world, if you will, then, in the pursuit of that, measurement of outcomes or input to output ratios become very important. And input to output ratios is fundamental to how we think about investing. So basically, let me take a simple example. There's a poor, hungry person sitting outside a temple looking for people to give him some food. And some, charitably minded people give him food or give him money to get some food. And clearly that has a positive impact. Or if we help the person basically become, healthier, provide some medical attention, etc. Anything you do to help that person is a net positive. And so that at a base level is perfectly fine. But then if you were to ask yourself the question, what is the impact of giving that person a meal? Or let's take it a step further. What is the impact of giving that person 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? Clearly, that also has a great social impact. The actual benefit to society may not be optimized. So, to do a real benefit to society, one would need to contrast that with other initiatives one could take and try to compare and contrast them. So we have the guy sitting outside the temple who's hungry, and you could give him food, etc., and that would be helpful. Let's say there's a family which is homeless, for example, in Bangalore, for example, and some charitably minded people help provide shelter to that family. And again, there's a cost for doing that. And so if you were to compare these two initiatives, which is feeding a person, giving them, what the base level calories they need, or providing shelter to a family, one cannot do everything that is needed by societies underprivileged. So which of the two, for example, has a higher return to society? And what happens with most philanthropic endeavors and most philanthropic organizations is that is not a question that's ever considered. And the reason the question is never considered is because it's too difficult to answer. So, how would you measure the impact of giving someone food and saying, okay, the impact of this is XYZ, and it costs X and it benefits Y, for example? And you provide a family shelter and that costs A and the benefit is B. So how does A and X and Y and B compare? And those comparisons become really difficult. And that's what Esther Duflo and her husband tried to do. They looked at different endeavors that different nonprofits were doing. They did a lot of field work in Rajasthan, and they actually tried to quantify and measure the outcomes. And for most philanthropic efforts, measurement of outcomes is extremely difficult. Just because these things are so subjective, so nebulous, if we have a bunch of homeless, drug addicts in Los Angeles, for example, and there's a nonprofit that provides free needles to them in the hope that there is at least, less transmission of undesirable diseases, etc., with contaminated needles. That also does good. But how do you compare the three? How do you compare, is the needle program better than giving the temple guy food, or is that better than giving a family shelter? Which of the three is the best? And the which of the three is the best is really important because resources are limited. So if we knew for a fact that the best of the three is to provide the family shelter, then we would ignore the other two and provide as many family shelters as we could, because then it would just become a no-brainer. And the second problem in philanthropy is that I'll use a US example. There may be similarities in India. But if I take the example of the Rockefeller Foundation, or let's say the Ford Foundation in the United States, and let's say, for example, that the Rockefeller Foundation has an endowment of $1 billion. Okay, so they have $1 billion usually invested in, some diversified way. And US charitable laws for nonprofits require them to spend 5% of their total corpus every year to maintain their nonprofit status. So they have $1 billion, they have to spend $50 million. Okay. And they spend the 50 million. And they spend the 50 million in a variety of different initiatives. Maybe some of it is going to the needle program, some of it is going to help homeless people in India, this variety of different initiatives. The $1 billion that they have invested maybe annually averages out a return of, let's say, 7 or 8% a year. So after 1 year, what happens is that they have spent 50 million, and they have made about 70 or 80 million. So a year later, they would have 1 billion, $20 million available, more than the 1 billion they had a year ago. It does not matter if the 50 million that they spent had any positive impact or not. It's irrelevant, because every year the Rockefeller Foundation will spend 50 million and they will make 40% more than that. And so the corpus will keep growing and the organization will exist forever, regardless of whether it does well or not. Now, if we, instead of the Rockefeller Foundation, we think of a for-profit company. And let's take a for-profit company in Bangalore called Infosys. Okay, done extremely well for a very long period of time, extremely well run, very profitable, very highly valued by the market, etc. If Infosys provides useless services and the quality of their services are poor, what will happen is that next year their sales will go down. And if they continue to provide poor service, more and more of their clients will leave permanently. And eventually, regardless of how much money they have in the bank, etc., eventually the company will cease to exist. It will basically go bankrupt. So in a capitalist system, there is a natural feedback cycle where if a company does not deliver high value products or services, the market system will wipe out those businesses eventually. So capitalism has a natural creative destruction built into its basic frameworks. And the creative destruction is why we as a society do better every year. Because the not so great businesses, or the businesses that are no longer providing that much value, will continue to basically be wiped out or liquidated, etc. and newer businesses will come in, which provide much better value and much better outcomes, etc. But in the nonprofit world, when we look at something like the Rockefeller Foundation, with this 5% out and 7% in, there is no such feedback loop. They can endlessly, for the next 100 years, next 1,000 years, provide terrible service to society. And it does not matter. They will still exist. So, nonprofit that is interested in optimizing, doing a great job, using limited resources to provide maximum value to investors or to society, has to artificially employ a different set of rules. And almost all nonprofits, not only do they not know these rules, they don't apply them. So to apply them, you first have to know them. Other than me and a handful of people like Esther and Abhijit, nobody knows these rules. Nobody cares to know these rules. Nobody gives a damn about knowing these rules. So I want to talk a little bit about these rules. So we discussed that measurement of outcomes. Measurement of outcomes is not necessary in a capitalist system, in a for-profit world, because the market will decide whether you are providing good service or not. And if you don't provide good service, it'll just take you out. So in the nonprofit world, what we at Dakshana did is, when we were starting out, is we said, okay, measurement in the nonprofit world is very difficult, but measurement in the nonprofit world is absolutely essential. If you don't measure, then how do you know how you're doing? How do you know whether you're useful or useless? So what we did at Dakshana is we inverted the problem. One of my most loved quotes of Charlie Munger is invert, always invert. So we inverted the problem. So we said, we are not going to pick a cause and then figure out how to measure the outcome of that cause. We're going to pick causes where we know outcome measurement is easy. So, for example, the guy outside the temple who's hungry, there are lots of complications in figuring out those outcomes, especially when you want to compare them to other alternatives. Just comparing the hungry guy outside the temple to giving a homeless family housing, just those two, if you had 1 crore to spend on feeding, hungry people versus providing 10 families permanent shelter, for example, which is better? I don't know which is better. And it's very difficult to answer that question. So what we did at Dakshana is we said that we will not answer such questions because such questions are difficult to answer. We will pick causes where the answer is easy. So we said, okay, out of all the different things that we can do in terms of helping humanity, providing housing to the homeless, providing food to the hungry, etc., we decided that we want to pick causes where outcome measurement is easy. And the cause that Dakshana picked was education. And the reason we picked education was for 2 or 3 reasons. One of the biggest reasons we picked education is outcome measurement is really obvious. And the second reason we picked it is, if I just compare education to the guy outside the temple, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So just from the perspective that there's a guy outside the temple and you could take two different approaches, which is, one is provide 3 meals a day, or the second approach is to figure out what skills or help can be given to that person so he or she can work and feed themselves eventually. In general, without even doing a lot of measurement, the second approach is likely to have a higher return on social return on invested capital. So we decided we wanted to teach fishing and we didn't want to give fish because just implicitly that teaching fishing is going to do well. The second thing that Dakshana did is we focused on, initially, our initial focus was on identifying very bright kids who were extremely poor 16-year-old kids. Typically, these were kids whose parents were illiterate. They were laborers or farmers or, blue collar jobs, etc. Never went to college and may not even have spoken English, etc. So that's the demographic we were working with. And we would identify kids who were kids of these people, and we would take over their education for 2 years, the grade 11th and grade 12, 11th and 12th standard, and we would blast them into IIT. And Dakshana has been doing this for 17 years now. And if we look back in the last 17 years, something like around close to 70% of the kids that we have taken on have been successfully accepted by the IITs. And close to 90% of the kids that we've taken on have been accepted by the NITs or the IITs. And if we expand that to kids who have gone to some engineering college, it would probably approach 95%. So the success rate is really high. So just to give you an example, in Bangalore, we have a lot of alums, and our kids come from all over India. We have kids from Kargil in Kashmir, and we have sent a girl from Andaman Islands to IIT. And we have sent kids from the Sundarbans Delta in Bengal, Arunachal Pradesh. We have sent kids from very, very far-flung corners of India to the IITs. And after they finish, a lot of them end up in Bangalore. For example, one of our Dakshana alums in Bangalore, whose parents had income of less than 5,000 rupees a month when we accepted him as a Dakshana scholar. He's from Fatehpur district in Uttar Pradesh, Rajiv Kumar. He has been at Google in Bangalore for 10 years now. He graduated from IIT Kanpur in 2014. In Bangalore, Google pays him 1.9 crores a year. And if he transfers to Mountain View, California, which if he wants to, they will allow him to do that, his annual salary would go up to about $800,000 a year. But if we look at the compensation he gets in Bangalore, the 1.9 crores a year, the family used to be at 5,000 rupees a month, 60,000 rupees a year. They went from 60,000 rupees a year to basically close to 2 crores a year. And to take them from 60,000 rupees to 2 crores, Dakshana spent about 2.5 lakhs on that person. So we put 2.5 lakhs into a kid, and the families, typically our families are under $100 a month, like 7,000, 8,000 rupees. Many of them are less than 2,000, 3,000 rupees a month in household income. So if I were to say to anyone, look, here is a poor family. They make 5,000 rupees a month, or even let's say 10,000 rupees a month. And I want their income to be 50,000 rupees a month, for example. That would give them a decent standard of living to take it from 5,000 to 50,000. And I were to tell you that I'll give you 2.5 lakhs. Please identify any family that you want. Here's 2.5 lakhs. And in 6 years, make that family income 10 times or more than what it is today. And the answer for the most part would be that it cannot be done. That you cannot, on the face of it, like if I go to the guy who's outside the temple and I look at the guy outside the temple and I say, okay, let's provide skilling to this person. Okay, let's see what we can provide, etc., so that the income is 50,000. It would almost for sure fail. It wouldn't work. Now, the reason it works at Dakshana is because the benevolent government of India basically has this amazing system of universities and institutes called the IITs. The IITs are very heavily subsidized by the government. They are almost free to attend. If you withdraw the government subsidy from the IITs, and the IITs were going to charge the students who were attending the actual cost of tuition and boarding and lodging and everything, it would be around approaching 15 to 20 lakhs a year. It would cost each student about close to 20 lakhs a year if you withdraw the government funding. So if someone went through 4 years of IIT education, it would cost them about 80 lakhs. And the transformation that took place for Rajiv Kumar in Bangalore took place because we did not spend the 80 lakhs. The benevolent government of India spent the 80 lakhs. But the benevolent government of India does not care whether you are rich or poor when you go to IIT. So if you are Ambani's son and you go to IIT, you get a subsidy. And if you are some extremely poor person's son and you go to IIT, you get the same subsidy. It is very stupid public policy, but that's just the way it is. There's a lot of stupid public policy in India and other countries around the world. But we saw that there's this policy that exists, which is that if you get a person to IIT, you unlock 80 lakhs of government support. And to unlock that 80 lakhs of government support, Rajiv Kumar has to be accepted by the IITs. Now, to be accepted by the IITs, the coaching will cost you 3 to 5 lakhs. Okay. So a family like Rajiv's family, which is making 60,000 rupees a year, how are they going to pay 4 lakhs for coaching? They cannot. They don't even know. In fact, the kids that we are taking for IIT prep have not heard the word IIT. If you are in the Sundarbans or in the Andaman Islands, you're growing up or whatever, you don't know what IIT is. You've never heard of IIT. So they cannot even aspire to go to IITs because they've never heard of it. And if they've heard of it, they will never know how to crack the exam because there is no coaching available in the Andaman Islands for IIT. There's no coaching available in Fatehpur district that is high quality for IIT coaching, or the Sundarbans or Arunachal Pradesh or remote Tripura, etc. So there is an awareness problem, there is a coaching availability problem, and there's an affordability problem. But what we realize at Dakshana is that there are high quality brains everywhere. And the IITs were supposed to take the best talent of India and create the best engineers. But what actually happened is they took the best talent from urban India, which was middle class or higher. And from that demographic, they created the best engineers. So if you were from rural India, or if you were from urban India and poor, you were excluded. And if you're excluding rural India, you're already straight away excluding 70% of the country. About 900 million people are excluded. And then if you exclude the urban poor, you're again excluding few hundred million people there as well. You're basically excluding something like 85, 90% of the country from even having a chance to go there. But what we realize at Dakshana is that 80 lakhs of subsidy is really the key to transformation of families and making heroes from zeros. And we cannot spend, and we would have very low return on invested capital if we were to spend 82 and a half lakhs on each kid. So if the IITs were not subsidized and Dakshana has to spend 82 and a half lakhs, 2.5 lakhs for the coaching and 80 lakhs for the 4 years, our social return on invested capital would be terrible. Because now, if I go back and tell you that, okay, there's this guy outside the temple who has no food, and I'll give you 82 lakhs, and please take his income to 50,000 a month. Well, all you need to do is you put the 82 lakhs in the bank, and the bank will give you about 4 lakhs or 5 lakhs a year. And so you immediately taken the income to 45,000. So if you're willing to spend the 85 lakhs, you can take the guy outside the temple and permanently feed him, no problem. And you can even take a homeless family and give them housing. But then the social return on invested capital is very low. So Dakshana was able to do what I would call is a hack. It was a hack, or it was jugaad, as we would say in India, that we basically took a government program that was never intended to alleviate poverty, and we transformed it to a program to alleviate poverty in a way that the bureaucrats who set up that program could never imagine. So there is a set of schools that the government set up, the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas. There are two of these schools in Bangalore. There's one of these schools in every district of India, almost every district of India. In my opinion, this is the biggest achievement of Rajiv Gandhi, and nobody knows about it. So, Rajiv Gandhi had this harebrained idea that he went to Doon School, and Doon School is a very elite boarding school, the best, used to be the best boarding school in India. I don't know if that's still the case, probably still the case. And he had a wonderful time. It goes from sixth grade to 12th grade. And he had this harebrained idea that he wanted to provide a Doon school type education to poor kids in rural India, across all of rural India. And he went to his Minister of HR at the time, Narasimha Rao, and he told Narasimha Rao that this is what I would like to have happen. And Narasimha Rao was a very talented man. And amazingly, this school system got created. Not only did it get created, but they were able to take a lot of elements from Doon School and replicate it across 660 schools across India. So there are 660 of these boarding schools across India. And if you visit these schools, for the most part, you would be very impressed with your government. You would be impressed that our government can do such a great job. They put one of these boarding schools in each district of India. And they came up with a kind of like a McDonald's type cookie cutter format of what a school should look like. Each school has 30 acres of land, and each school is a boarding school from 6th standard to 12th standard following CBSE curriculum. It's a residential boarding school, and the government pays everything. The way the center did it is they told the states, you provide us 30 acres of land in every district, and we will create the school, and the students from your district can go to that school for free. So obviously the states get a benefit. And what happens with these schools is they are like kind of mini IITs. So every year in sixth standard, across these 660 schools, 80 kids are admitted to sixth standard in two sections, section A, section B. So 40 kids in each section in 660 schools. There is a language independent IQ test that's conducted by the government across India for fifth standard students. And anyone in fifth standard can take that test. And the test is designed so that it's not really in English or Hindi or something. It's kind of like a language independent IQ test. So there are about 40 lakh kids a year across India who take that test. And there are 40,000 seats in the JNVs for the students who are accepted. So it is a 1% acceptance rate. All of the tabulation and selections are done in Delhi. So if there's a school in Bangalore, for example, there are two Navodaya Vidyalayas, the principal or any of the people in that school have no ability to admit a single child. They get a list from Delhi that tells them these are the 80 kids that are going to be joining your school. And they have to take those 80 kids. Now, the kids that are coming to these schools are already in the top 1% from an IQ perspective. The schools are English medium, and they gradually convert over to English medium as the kids get better. By 8th or 9th standard, all the teaching is in English. Dakshana conducts our selection tests in 10th standard for these kids. And so there are 40,000 kids in 10th standard. When I first started in 2007, I used to get a spreadsheet in Irvine, California from Delhi, from the head of these schools, which gave me a single spreadsheet with 40,000 rows with the test scores of all these kids across India. It took me about 10 minutes to take that 40,000 list down to 4,000 of the best performers. And then we invited these 4,000 kids in 10th standard to take our selection test, the Dakshana selection test. And they took our selection test across, maybe 30, 40 centers in India. The schools would transport these kids. And then from these 4 or 5,000 kids that we tested, we picked about 400 kids. So we took about 10% of the kids and we accepted them for 2 years of IIT coaching. So basically, the Dakshana scholars are 400 kids coming from an original pool of 40 lakh kids. And when we take these 400 kids, why would we not get 80 or 90% to IIT? They got brains coming out of their ears. So, like Rajiv Kumar, who is in Bangalore working for Google at almost 2 crores, was one of these kids. And all we did is we used this whole government mechanism to identify very high IQ brains. And when we spent 2.5 lakhs on a very high IQ brain versus 2.5 lakhs on feeding some poor guy outside a temple, the 2.5 lakhs spent on a very high IQ brain is going to give you a much higher return than feeding the guy at the temple. So we knew that the social return on invested capital is extremely high. And then Dakshana scaled this in the next few years. We have our own campus now in Pune. It's a 109-acre campus. We have 1,400 kids at any time going through IIT prep. At our own campus, we have 600 kids, and that's going to increase to about 2,000 eventually. And so this is what we do. So Dakshana spends about $2.5 million a year, about 20 crores or so. I think we get massive, massive returns on invested capital on that. It's actually cannot be measured because it's so extreme. If you take the case of Rajiv Kumar, all his future generations and all his cousins and siblings and everybody else is all in a different situation now. And so what is the social impact on that? The social impact of that is approaching infinity. It's extremely high. It's no point even trying to measure it because the measurements are so extreme. And that's how Dakshana looks at it. And I wish other nonprofits would study Duflo and Banerjee and Dakshana and try to approach it that way. One other thing before I stop my monologue is that one of our centers where we do this coaching, one of the larger centers, is in Bangalore. There is a Charles T. Munger Hall at that school that we built. We spent about $3.5 million on the infrastructure for the coaching that happens in Bangalore for about 240 kids at a time. It's near the airport, Yelahanka, near Lanka. So if you guys want to visit sometime, you can just nudge me or nudge Shanuradha and we can arrange for you guys to visit the school. And you might be actually very impressed with what your government has done and the public-private partnership that Dakshana has with the government. So with that, I'll turn it over to you and we'll see what questions or comments you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohnish. You opened the eyes to a whole different subjects for us in Rotary world. So I'll just let the flow open and then I'll take it over from there. Over to the any questions, please. You can raise your hand or you can type on the chat. So before they get prepped, how did Warren Buffett give it to the Bill Gates Foundation? Because I understand they both are good friends, so you know it very closely. So does he measure it like that?
Well, I think Buffett has a much more difficult problem than we have. So he wants to give away more than 99% of his wealth. And his wealth is, I mean, if he had not started giving away the wealth, he would be the wealthiest guy in the world right now. He's still in the top 5 or 7 wealthiest people in the world. So what Buffett did in 2005 is he decided that he would take 5% of the shares of Berkshire Hathaway that he had left with him every year. And he would donate 5% of those shares to the Gates Foundation. 85% of it goes to the Gates Foundation and 5% to each of the foundations of his 3 kids. So Berkshire Hathaway has approximately 1.5 million shares outstanding. And each share trades for about $600,000. So the company has a value of about 900 billion. And Warren Buffett's stake in the company before he started giving his shares away was approximately 35% or so of the company, about 500,000 shares. So he used to have 500,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway in 2005. The first year, he gave away 25,000 shares, which was 5%. So he's left with 475,000 shares. The second year, he gave 5% of 475,000, which is a little less than 25,000 shares. So if you calculate every single year from then till now, every year the number of shares given goes down a little bit because the numerator is going down. But the thing is, because Berkshire Hathaway is compounding at a rate more than 5% a year, his net worth is still growing. So if he were to live for 1,000 years, he would still not have given away all his money. There would still be money left because the 5% of what was left is being given away. Now, he has a peculiar problem that most of us don't. When he was starting this giveaway program, his net worth was $100 billion. If he had not given away any money, that net worth today would be around 300 or $350 billion approximately, which would be the wealthiest guy. The LVMH guy is the wealthiest guy today at about 200 billion, but he would be almost one and a half, two times that. The problem you run into is that when you want to give away 350 billion, how are you going to give that away? What are you going to give it away to where it has some positive impact on society? So he did the best that he could with this big size problem, which is he convinced Bill Gates to take the money in addition to his own money and pump the money out through the Gates Foundation. And the Gates Foundation, at the scale at which they are giving the money away, is in the billions every year, several $billions a year. They are doing, working on vaccines, alleviation of malaria, just different programs, women's health, reproductive health, and so on and so forth, US education and so on. So given the massive amount of money that Buffett is giving away every year, like he's giving away about $6 billion a year, his choices are very limited. And so within those, it's the same problem that Berkshire Hathaway has. If Berkshire Hathaway has to make an investment today that is going to move the needle for the company, it needs to be an investment of more than 25 or $50 billion. How many companies in India even have a market value of more than 25 or 50 billion? How many companies in the world have a market value? And he wants to make an investment where the value of his ownership of the business is less than 10%. So how many companies in the world have a value of less than 200 billion or 500 billion? It's very, very, have a value more than that, more than 200 or 500 billion. So Buffett's problem is the size problem. It's a very good problem, but we don't have that size problem, thankfully. So we can be a little bit more nimble than he is. My email address, people were asking for my email address. My email address is, if you have profitable endeavors to talk about, it's mp@pabraifunds.com, PABRAIFUNDS.com. For charity, it's mpabrai, MPABRAI @dakshana.org. So those are the two addresses. So anyway, over to you, Biju.
Okay, Mohnish, thanks a lot. That was very elucidated very nicely. So the next question is from Bhat. How does Dakshana look at philanthropy in terms of enabling opportunities via content and online education in today's world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have looked at it quite a bit in terms of the efficiencies and digitization of what we do. So far, the answer has always come back that when we are looking at things like the IIT entrance exam, the yields would go down a lot if we relied on digital. Now, we could do a lot more kids. Recently, I had a nice call with the physics wala, and physics walas have done some really good job, and they want to collaborate with us on some of this stuff, where they've got some real strengths on the digital side, and they want to give us all kinds of things for free, where we can broaden, and we are looking into it. So we will evaluate, whether we can have an offering which can. Right now, Dakshana is an inch wide and a mile deep. and whether it makes sense for us to be a mile wide and an inch deep.
Very interesting. Thanks. Past President Ramdas is another question. Dakshana is an amazing example. Question is, how can it be scaled to make a positive, to make a disruptive societal impact?
It's a very good question. So the way I am trying to answer the question for myself is that June 11th, 2054, I am leaving planet Earth. And we are almost, I'm a little less than 30 years from my departure date from planet Earth. 29 years and 355 days or something, 350 days. So I have an engine that is compounding wealth. And I have another engine that is giving away wealth, which is giving away through Dakshana. What I had done is I had cloned Warren Buffett, which is when we first started Dakshana, I said, okay, every year, like Buffett gives away 5%, I'll start by giving away 2% of our wealth every year. At that time, the net worth was around 50 million. So we were giving away about $1 million a year at the time. It is my goal that one day before departure from planet Earth, which would be June 10th, 2054, I should have 5,000 rupees left to my name and everything else should be gone. There's a guy called Chuck Feeney, and I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but you can Google him. Chuck Feeney passed away recently. He formed a company called Duty Free International. He formed a lot of companies, General Atlantic Partners, etc. He was a billionaire many times over. And he had this objective that when he passed away, he wanted to have nothing left. So he was, for the last several decades, giving away money, mostly anonymously, like a lot of buildings and things to universities, hospitals, and all that. And when Chuck Feeney died in San Francisco, he was renting a very small studio apartment in San Francisco. And the total assets he had left was under $100,000, which was also given away after he passed away by his family. So Chuck Feeney, from my point of view, is my hero. And so I like to play math games. I like to play games with numbers. So the challenge I will have is that Dakshana needs to scale over time, where we are currently giving away, we currently are donating about 2.5, 3 million a year is what we are spending. We need to scale that up so that maybe in a few years it is 10 or 20 million a year. And then a few years after that is 30, 40 million a year. But, we'll get there. So what will happen is the return on invested capital, sadly, will go down, just like it is lower for Gates Foundation than it is for us because they are so large. But that's okay. So it's okay to go down if the absolute numbers are going up. And so there are two games I'm playing. There's a compounding game to crank and build wealth, and there's a game to give away the money. And the second game needs to step up big time. And we'll try and do that. We'll try to follow Chuck's example.
Sure, Mohnish, you let a home run there. So the next question, and probably the last question, is Vinod. Please go ahead, ask your question.
Thanks, Viju. Mohnish, the question is, Dakshana Foundation, are we looking at only IITs and NITs, or, the 400 students, what?
We are now taking 1,000 kids a year, and we have expanded to medical. So basically, IIT, NIT, AIMS, and government medical colleges. So the 1,000 kids a year, we are spending approximately $2,500 per kid. So our expenditures are about 2.5 million. We have a large campus in Pune, and we had just embarked on a expansion. So that campus currently accommodates 600 kids. We are spending about $12 million and increasing the capacity of that to about 1,100 kids. It'll take about 3 years to do that. So the next thing will be that instead of spending about 2.5 million a year, once we have expanded the campus, our spending will go to about 4 million a year or so, 4 or 5 million. And we are continuously looking at what we can do. So this is something that we are experimenting with different things. We're looking at different things. And there are some extremely impressive organizations. So for example, one organization you guys may be very familiar with is Akshaya Patra. And Akshay Patra is in Bangalore. and they do incredible work. So I think the social return on invested capital that Akshaya Patra generates, because we've looked at it very closely, is very high. The midday meal program that they supplement with the government is a really, really good program. They make it work really well. So we also have the choice that, let's say I could at some point say, okay, let's give 2 million a year to Akshaya Patra, for example. Let's have them scale even faster. My concern will be that when I go to them, they'll just say, we can't take it. We can't scale. So these are fun problems to think about, but that's what we'll try to do. We'll look at models, other models. Akshaya Patra is a good model. There's another one, Foundation for Excellence, Teach for India, Akanksha Foundation. There are a few others that are foundations we are aware of in India. And I'm always trying to understand what work people are doing. And there's another one in Bangalore, where you guys might know, the Nudge. And Nudge is another one doing some very good work. So we'll look at, we don't need to have it all homegrown. I'm happy to just write checks. That'll be fine too. No problem. I enjoyed the interaction and thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Bye.